Hello everyone, this is Prem Kumar. In this video, we are going to talk about the SSO authentication using OpenID Connect. In the last video, we talked about the SAML 2.0 protocol. OpenID Connect is also kind of a similar protocol that helps with the federated identity management system. So first, what is OpenID Connect? From the name itself, we can say that it is like an open identification. A simple example can be passport. With passport, you get your own identification, and with that identification, you can visit different countries, right? Similarly, with OpenID Connect, you get your own identification, and with that identification, you can access different resources or different applications. Next is, it follows an open standard decentralized authentication mechanism. Decentralized, what I mean here is, the OpenID IDP can be in any place. It can be totally decoupled, and we can use the OpenID Connect protocol to connect and verify the identification and also receive the tokens. Like for example, with OpenID Connect, we can use Google as the identity provider, which is totally decentralized, right? You can use Google as your IDP for your application, and then you can authenticate yourself. The next important definition is OpenID Connect is built over the OAuth 2.0 authorization framework. We will talk about the relation between the OpenID Connect and OAuth 2.0 in a short time. So in the previous videos, we implemented SSO using SAML. So what are the main differences between the SAML and the OpenID Connect protocol? First, instead of going between the differences, I will start with the similarities between SAML and OpenID Connect. The first similarity is we already saw both are identity protocols that helps with implementing the single sign-on SSO. The next is both are standard, secure, and more or less they follow same kind of authentication mechanism. I consider these two are the main similarities. Now let's look at some of the differences between these two. The first thing is, which many developers say, OpenID Connect is easy to implement. You don't have any kind of XML handling. They do use some kind of JSON tokens. So this can be a main difference. There is no XML formatting in OpenID Connect. The next main difference is, remember during the SAML video we traced and we found a lot of assertion tags that helps to identify, but with OpenID Connect we get the ID tokens that contains the claims which helps to identify. The final difference is, with SAML you can initiate both the IDP initiated workflow as well as the SP initiated, the service provider initiated workflow, but in OpenID Connect it always supports the SP initiated workflow. So these can be the main differences between SAML and OpenID Connect. So the main takeaway point is OpenID Connect is very easy to implement. Okay, the next topic is, we saw that OpenID Connect is built over this OAuth 2.0. Now let's talk about some of the relationship between the OpenID Connect and OAuth 2.0. First, as I told already, OpenID Connect, which is the authentication framework, it sits above the authorization framework of OAuth 2.0 layer. It means for authorization, it uses all those OAuth 2.0 concepts, but it has its own concept of authentication. Now let's look at some of the main points that OpenID Connect adds over the OAuth 2.0. The first main thing is, it follows some standard set of scopes and claims. What you see in the picture, you can see there are standard set of scopes defined at the bottom. You see profile, email, address, and phone. And inside these scopes, you get the claims. Claims can be considered as the data. As you see, the profile, the orange one, it holds lot of claims or lot of data. Email, just it holds two data as email and email verified. Similarly, phone and the address. So all these scopes and claims are standard naming convention. If you use different identity providers, you are going to use same kind of scope and same kind of claims. The next is, it also has some standard endpoint resourcing. For example, if you want to get user info, then you can use /user info, and before you can use the domain name. Again, this can be same for different identity providers. If you use Okta, you have the user info under Okta domain. If you use Google as the identity provider, again you can use the same resource path or the same endpoint. The next point is about the tokens. With OpenID Connect, you get an additional token. We call it as ID token. If you look at OAuth 2.0, then you have the authorization code and access token. But with OpenID Connect, you also get an ID token, which is a JWT token. JWT is an open standard for securely transmitting information as a JSON object. It contains the user information encoded in base 64 format. So once the application it receives this ID token, it can decode and get the right data. The next important point is, as of 8.7, Pega do support only the authorization code workflow for OpenID Connect. If you look at OpenID Connect, by default it supports a lot of workflows. For example, the authorization code or the client credentials. There can be different workflows which OpenID Connect support, but Pega by out of the box it supports only the authorization code workflow. So we are bound to use only the authorization code workflow, which uses different authorization code token, access token, and then ID token. Okay, now let's look at the authorization code workflow between Pega and the Okta as the identity provider. As you see in the screen, there are three participants. One is the user. He needs to access a Pega application. So Pega application can be a relaying party. And the third is the Okta, which is the identity provider. Let's see how the workflow starts and ends. It first starts with end user sending a request to the Pega application. Since SSO is configured into the Pega application and it uses the IDP as the identity provider, it sends an authentication request as a next step to the identity provider. Then the identity provider, it validates everything. And if the user is never authenticated using the identity provider, then the identity provider, it sends the login page for the user to log in. That will be the third step. And once the user gets the login page, the fourth step is, of course, they can send the login credentials that gets sent to the IDP. Remember, even though user is standing apart, he is using all the Pega's URL. So Pega is also in the middle between the identity provider and the user. So once the credentials are verified, then the identity provider can send the authorization code to the Pega server URL. Now Pega application, it can process the auth token and it can send another request to receive the other tokens. The other tokens can be the access token and ID token. Now with the right authorization token, the Okta or the identity provider can easily provide you the other access tokens and ID tokens, which they will do. So this ID token, as we saw before, is a JWT token. We can validate the ID token and we can decode it and we can find the right thing. And once everything is validated, then the user information can be exchanged. So this is how the authorization code workflow, it works at the backend. All you do is just hit the SSO URL and everything will go seamlessly. Okay, now enough of introduction. Let's get our hands dirty by implementing the SSO authentication using OpenID protocol into the Pega Designer Studio. Let's get started. So first I will take the role of the Okta administrator and then I will provision the users and I will create a new app integration. So first thing on user management, go to the left panel and then move to the directory people. I already created a new user for this OpenID Connect. I name it as Premji1991. You will not find any operator ID for this name. Let's consider him as a new onboarded employee for the A-Life organization. The email address is premji1991@gmail.com. So your user is created. Now let's do the app integration for OpenID Connect. Again, go to the left panel and then go to applications and click on applications. We already set up some applications, for example, A-Life clients, which uses the SAML authentication. Now to do the OpenID Connect, you need to make another app integration. So let's start with creating an app integration and then you say OIDC or OpenID Connect. And then you can also select the application type. You can just give it as a simple web application and then go to next. So this will create or present you a wizard for implementing the OpenID Connect. Names, I'm going to say clients OpenID. And on the grant type, since we know that OpenID Connect is built over the OAuth, it uses the client credentials grant type. You can use this as well, but the workflow, it's going to be the authorization code workflow. So that is not a problem. So just use the client credentials so that we can use the credentials into the Pega's authentication service configuration. Next, here you have to change the callback URL, which we will do shortly. And you also have a sign out URL, which we will leave it optional. And finally, on the assignments. In the SAML, we already know how to add users to the application using assignments. Similarly, here also you can configure. Here you can say like allow everyone in your organization to access. It means every user in the organization directory can access this OpenID Connect. But you can also limit it to selected group of users. I'm going to just say allow everyone to use it and then finally do a save. Now if you go to the assignment tab, you can also find that you cannot add users individually because it implicitly assigned to the users. All the users can now access this OpenID Connect. Okay, now go to the general tab, and here you will also find the client credentials that got created. You see a client ID which you can copy, also the client secret. And note one thing, we have to update this redirect URL with the ngrok URL on which the Pega Personal Edition is hosted. As a prerequisite, I already hosted my server into the ngrok to the internet so that it can be accessed by the Okta, which is hosted in cloud. If you want to know how to host your Pega Personal Edition to internet, you can visit the following link in the description where I explained about the steps to implement using ngrok. So first we need to know some Pega URLs, right? Let's take the role of Pega administrator and go to Pega Designer Studio and create a new authentication service for this OpenID Connect. I have just logged in into the personal edition, and you can see in the host name a chunk of characters that uses the ngrok tunnel. Okay, now let's straight away create our authentication service. I'm going to use the create menu. Go to sysadmin and then authentication service. Now it presents me the create form. Here in the authentication type, you have to select OpenID Connect. Just choose this option and provide a valid name. I'm going to say Okta OpenID and then create and open. Now all you have to do is just fill this rule form. For the service alias, I'm just going to say OpenID, so that will be part of the login URL. The next is the OpenID Connect provider configuration. So if you compare the SAML authentication service against this OpenID, definitely the rule form is going to be different because both are different protocols. You don't have any kind of service provider details. It means you don't want to import any kind of service provider metadata into the Okta, but you need the identity provider metadata. As you can see, the first one is authentication flow. It is read-only and it supports only the authentication code flow. That's why you don't get an option to choose the different authentication flow. And then you need the authorization endpoint, which will be the first flow to get the authorization token. And then you also need the token endpoint where you can get the access token and ID token. So how do we get this endpoint details? As I told before, OpenID Connect, they use a standard endpoint. So standard endpoint, what I mean here is whatever identity providers you may use, but the resource path or the endpoint extension is going to be the same. For example, the trial instance is the host name. Then all you have to do is .wellknown/OpenID configuration. Just provide this URL, then you will get the right metadata. As you can see, I found a JSON structure with all the metadata. I'm just going to copy this and open it in an editor. If you see here, you find a rich set of metadata. You see the issuer, you see the authorization endpoint, you see the token endpoint, the user info endpoint, and then you also see the JWKS URL, that is a key store URL. And two other important configuration is on scopes supported. You see a lot of scopes that get supported and also the clients which contains the data. For example, like the email, the given name, the first name, last name, all these details you will find under the clients. So this is totally enough. Now I can build the authentication service using this metadata. So here instead of copy pasting each and individual data, let's try importing metadata by using the URL. So I'm going to say via URL and then just copy paste this URL. Let's see if everything gets passed correctly. Yes, it gets passed. You see the authorization, the token, the user info, and even a key store instance got created. Let's open this key store instance. It uses the key store URL. You can also find the same key store URL into the metadata. As you see here, it ends with OAuth2 v1 keys, and the same is used into the key store instance. So Pega creates everything. If you are creating manually a key store instance, make sure you give the right URL and then do a save. So once it is successfully saved, it means it can retrieve the keys from the right path. Okay, now let's go back to the authentication service and you see everything is filled. Now only thing is like client ID and client secret which you have to fill. Under the client information, you also see the scope is filled, the minimum scope. OpenID is the mandatory scope you need, and then it also fills the email and profile scope. You also have other scopes like phone or address. If you really want the right data, then you can put the scope here. For now, I don't need those data. I just need the email address and some full name which is under the profile scope. So here all we have to do is input the client ID and client secret. Let's go to the general tab and just copy the client ID and paste it here. Repeat the same for client secret. And one more thing which we have to update is the redirect URI. you should exactly mention the same redirect URI which is in the authentication service to the identity provider. So just copy this under PR auth. Don't worry that you have to provide the entire service alias. You just have to provide only the redirect URI which is PR auth. Copy and then edit the general settings and update the redirect URI. So here I'm going to say PR auth. Now then just do a save. So here we have configured the IDP metadata. We have configured the client information. The next is the operator identification. So you can also identify an operator by using the attribute. Here you can just provide the client's name. We already know what are the clients it gets supported, and email is one of the clients. So all I can do is just say email. So this will create an operator ID in the email value. I can also do the operator provisioning using model operator, and then I'm going to give my operator name. Here you can find different options of provisioning your operator. I have explained it into the SAML video which you can look into. Finally is the advanced configurations. Here you can leave everything as default. This is like how you are going to send the authentication request. You see, send access token as the authentication header, or you can also change it to query string parameter. But don't change this unless your IDP provider they want to change the access tokens into a different parameter, then you can do the change. And if you really want to send some certificates or signatures, then you can use the trust store and key store. For now, I'm not going to use that option. So let's leave it simple. And under the processing, you will find the similar processing which you see in the SAML authentication service. You can use the pre-authentication and post-authentication. Again, I'm not going to go much detail because I already explained in detail into the SAML video, which you can look into. Finally, under the mapping tab, you can do the mapping between the OpenID clients to the Pega's operator ID. So here what I'm going to try is, I'm going to use the given name client's data, and then I'll try to map it to the PY full name, and let's see if an operator ID is created and the full name gets updated with the right given name. Just copy this, and then under map from, you should provide the client's data under curly braces. So I say given name, and it is not PY full name, it is PY username. Just we'll map it to PY username. And finally, we just fill the history tab and do a save. So we have successfully configured our OpenID authentication service. Let's straight away test it. Just making sure there is no operator ID of PrameG1991 into the system. Now let's log in with the PrameG1991 and see if an operator ID is newly created. I'm able to successfully single sign on into the Pega application. Copy this URL and let's try it in the incognito mode. Now I'm going to launch it. You see the URL changes. First it sends an authentication request to IDP, and IDP still I never authenticated with the IDP. It provides me the login page. So here I'm going to log in. As you can see, Pega Dev Studio is launching. So it means the operator ID is successfully created. Now let's open the operator ID form and check the mapping also. If you open the operator ID, definitely the operator ID should be PrameG1991. And if you look at the full name, it is PrameG. It copied all other details from the Prame operator like the access group and everything, because we use the model operator as Prame, but it created a new operator ID and you just update the details which we configured it in the mapping tab. So we are all good with the OpenID Connect. Finally, let's see how to debug this OpenID if you face some issues. To do that, first we will enable some loggers. Now you go to Admin Studio, and in the Admin Studio, you navigate to the log categories, and from here we are going to create a new log category for the OpenID Connect, because by out of the box we don't have a log category for OpenID. So what I can do is go to Action, create a log category. I'm going to say OpenID. On the loggers, just search for OIDC. There you will find a lot of loggers, and the main important logger is OIDC client handler. Just use this and do a submit. So now we have created a new log category and added the right logger. The next step is you have to enable the debug mode, because by default only the error is enabled. As you can see, OpenID they have only the error. So just change it to the debug mode, change the log level, and then say log level can be debugged. You can also reset it after 2 hours. Just do a submit. Now the log level is changed to debug. So next time when we try to log in the OpenID URL, we will get all the steps that are responsible for the OpenID authorization code workflow. Let's straight away test that. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to log off the incognito and then try to log in again. And from here I can say login with OpenID. So since I've already authenticated with the IDP, it's not going to prompt me again and again with the same IDP login page. Now the SSO kicked in and we have successfully logged in. You can also check the logs from here. Go to sysadmin operations, logs, and then log files, Pega log files, and you can remove this. Now maybe you go to the last page. There you will find a lot of debug steps on the OIDC client handler. Scroll to the right, you will find the right steps. It is starting from initiating the OIDC flow. It is starting the authorization URL, and then it gets the authorization token. It processes the authorization token, and then with the auth code, it tries to fetch the access token. Then it fetched the access token and ID token. It validates the ID token, and finally it retrieves the user info. If you see here, there is a token. You see it starts with UI. Let's copy the token and let's decode it to check the content. Just copy it. You have a site called jwt.io. It is crafted by the Auth0, and here you can decode your base 64 encoded JWT token. So all you have to do is just paste here. You see the identity token, it contains the right payload data. You see the name, the email address, the subject, the issuer, all these details are in the ID token that helps to identify. A small tip, it is not recommended to decode your JWT token directly into some websites which is hosted in the internet. There may be some kind of hacking possibility. Mostly some big organization, they may have their own application of decoding the JWT token. In that case, you can just use it. So we are at the end of this video. If you want to try OpenID Connect using Google as the identity provider, I already have the steps in my blog article, which I also provided in the description of this video. You can look into the article and you can try it on your own. You can also try implementing the OpenID Connect using different identity providers. I hope you enjoyed and learned from this video. I would say OpenID Connect is the easiest authentication service which you can implement in Pega. The next video, it is going to be on OAuth. See you there.